I can't express enough how many students wait so long to submit their application and how detrimental that is to their success. Hey everyone, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am making the first video in my medical school application series. And I'm covering a topic that a lot of people don't give too much thought to, but I have seen from my own experiences that it has a dramatic impact on what medical schools you actually get into. And that is your application timeline. Now, there are a bunch of timelines everywhere on the internet, wherever you look, and everyone says different things, but through trial and error and working with a lot of people through this process, I have developed a timeline that I feel gives you the optimal chances of getting into the schools that you want to. So I'm going to be delivering this timeline to you on a sort of month-by-month basis, and I hope that you'll be able to follow along, jot down some notes that might be helpful, and have a better sense of when you should be doing what as you apply to medical school. And I'm going to start this timeline in January of your application year. And so the first chunk of time is actually January through March. And there are 3 tasks that you should be accomplishing in this January to March timeframe. The first is making sure you've completed your MCAT. Some people will have already finished their MCAT by now, and if that's you, that's perfect. Don't even think about this step. However, if you have not yet completed your MCAT, I encourage you to try to get it finished by the end of March. And I say that for a few reasons. First and foremost, it's hard to know what medical schools to actually apply to if you don't have that numerical MCAT score as a sort of proxy by which to gauge how competitive you are for different schools. And second, it's really hard to juggle too many things at once. And so I've had students in the past in May who are studying for their MCAT, who are writing their personal statements, who are coming up with college lists, who are asking for teacher recommendations. It's insane. They are trying to juggle so many things. And from my own experiences, they aren't able to do a very good job at any one of those things. The whole thing becomes an absolute mess. And so my recommendation is to get that MCAT studying, take the test, to get everything finished with that before you get into the big chunk of application material. That way you're able to focus on both of the tasks respectively without feeling so terrified and overwhelmed and under the water. The next thing that I recommend doing in the January to March timeframe is asking your teachers, your professors, your research mentors for letters of recommendation. Now, I will be making a future video giving more information about who to choose to write these letters, how to go about asking for these letters, but for now, just note that in this January through March timeframe, you should be thinking of who you're going to ask and then actually going and asking them. And some people say, Sarah, why does it really matter when I ask them? I know this professor, they love me, they're going to write this letter. And actually, I've had the experience where some of my students have professors that actually limit how many letters they'll write in a given application season. And so the professor that's beloved by you might be beloved by a lot of other people too. This may end in you actually missing the chance to be one of those 10 people who will actually be able to write letters for that application year. And so get those requests in by that January through March timeframe, and you should be good to go. The last and final piece of this January through March timeframe is contacting, if your university has one, the pre-health advising committee. So I went to Yale for undergrad, and they did in fact have a pre-health committee. And they actually had a lot of requirements if I wanted to apply to medical school. I had to complete this lengthy 12-page introspection of my entire life. I had to conduct a 30-minute interview with a committee member. And then when those things were finished, the committee got together, gathered all the data, compiled it into what they called a committee letter. So if your undergraduate college university has the option of a committee, I highly recommend you reach out to them in January, maybe February, figure out if there are deadlines, when those deadlines are, and get in any required materials so that they can write the committee letter for you. So just to recap, the 3 things you should be hoping to accomplish in that January through March period are 1, completing your MCAT, 2, reaching out to your desired letter writers and asking if they can write you a letter of rec for med school, and last but not least, reaching out to any pre-health advisory committee that your college or university offers. Now let's move on to the month of April. There are only 2 main tasks to accomplish during this month, but both are fairly time intensive. The first is creating a list of medical schools you hope to apply to, and the second is writing your personal statement and coming up with a pretty solid draft. Now, these tasks are very in-depth, and I will make future videos that address the details of them much more. But for now, just know that these are two things that should be mostly completed in the month of April. Bear in mind that some universities and colleges have exams starting around the end of April, and so if you are still a current college student, you may want to allot the second half of April to be for studying for exams. And so for that reason, I often urge my students to try to get their list done, try to get the personal statement writing done as early into the month of April as possible. And now let's move on to the month of May. May is full of moving parts, and so I'll start at the beginning and go through each one of them. The first is requesting a transcript. Whether you went to one university or four, MCAS, which is the Medical School Application Service, needs transcripts from each and every one of those colleges. The processing time between sending the transcript to MCAS and MCAS actually uploading the data to your application can be up to about 20 business days. And so my recommendation is try to get those transcripts requests in as early in May as you can. Some students will say, hey, but my grades are going to be published early June and I think I did really, really well in my spring classes. Don't wait. The fact of the matter is you should be submitting your application as soon as it's possible to submit it. And by waiting to just even request your transcript is going to put you behind the curve. And so I don't really care when your grades come out. I don't really care if your grades come out the last week of May. I really encourage you to try to get those transcript requests in early in May so that that's not holding up your application submission. The second thing I encourage you do in May is finalize that college list and finalize that personal statement. Hopefully you did a big chunk of the work in April, so those steps shouldn't take too long, but just make sure that you have a college list you're happy with and you have a personal statement that you are proud of. The next recommendation for the month of May is filling out your MCAS application. As I alluded to earlier, MCAS is the sort of virtual medical application system that most med schools in the US use. Texas is different and has a different system, but for purposes of simplicity, I'm just going to be talking about MCAS. And so there's lots of different parts of MCAS that need filled out, including the demographics section, including the activity section, work experience, awards, the whole 9 yards. For those of you, you all applied to college, you remember how there were all different parts of the Common App. This is much the same. So I encourage that you spend a lot of May trying to fill out all those pieces, checking, double checking, triple checking to make sure your grammar is right, making sure that you have accurate information put in, uploading that personal statement that you've hopefully polished by this point, and then also indicating what schools you want MCAS to actually send your application to. Another important part for the month of May is making sure that your letter writers are actually writing the letters. Some of them may have already notified you that the letters are finished. Perfect. But for those of you who have not heard from your letter writers since you first reached out to them, this is a great time to check in and make sure that they remember that the deadline for those letters is fast approaching. So as a recap for the month of May, get those transcript requests in, finish that college list, finish that personal statement, complete all of MCAS and triple check to make sure everything you put in is correct. And then remind your letter writers, if you haven't yet heard from them, that letters of record due at their earliest convenience. All right, now we're into June. June is actually pretty easy in terms of what you actually need to do. The most important part of June is submitting your MCAS as early as possible. So May is when MCAS opens. June is when you can start submitting MCAS. Every year the date changes, but it's oftentimes someday the first week of June, whether it's June 3rd, June 4th, whatever. I can't express enough how many students wait so long to submit their application and how detrimental that is to their success. I have peers from Yale, I have peers from med school who waited so long and then either didn't get into the schools that they wanted to or didn't even get in at all. Then the following year, when they reapplied, they did everything on a much earlier timescale and they were very, very successful in their application process. So I can't drill home enough the point that submitting your MCAS application as early as you can is going to cause you to be so far ahead of your classmates who are waiting until July, waiting until August to submit that application. And let me explain a little bit about why it really does put you at an advantage. So MCAS is a weird system, and they take in all the applicants who apply. They do this long verification process that takes several weeks. And then at some point they deem that you're verified and you're a real applicant and you can apply to med school. They then release to med school batches of these verified applicants in the order that these applicants submitted their application. So let's say you're in med school, end of June rolls around, and you're starting to get batches of applicants. You're sending out secondary essays, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then once you're getting those secondaries back, you're starting to send out interview requests. You're interviewing, and then you're taking those first choice applicants and filling slots in your med school. Now MCAS is sending more and more batches of applicants. After you're finished with that first batch, you'll now look at the second, and the process continues. Wouldn't you rather be in batch 1 than in batch 10? Because batch 1 is going to get first priority for seats. Batch 1 is going to get first priority for interview dates. And most med school admissions is pretty rolling in the sense that once they have people filling the positions, they don't need to keep reading through more applicants in later batches. So to optimize your chances of getting into the schools you want to, or honestly, even getting into any schools in general, being in the earliest possible batches of applicants are going to be the best way to get the most exposure to med school and the most opportunity to actually get a seat in the med school class of your dreams. And so, I think I've drilled home the point enough. Try to get that med school application in as early to the opening submission deadline as possible. So the early part of June is going to be dedicated to submitting your application and then also following up and making sure the rest of the materials are in. This is transcripts, this is letters of rec. When you hit the submit button on your application, those pieces don't just magically fall into place. It's your responsibility to make sure that those other application pieces have been uploaded to your account and that everything is good to go. As June goes by, take a little rest. If all your stuff is uploaded, if you've hit that submit button as close to the opening date as possible, you're good. You deserve a little break. But then, as June rolls on, your work's going to start again because schools are going to start sending secondary applications. These are a way to A, destroy your brain, make you write way too much and be really stressed, and B, take all of your money because all secondary applications typically require a fee for submission. So schools make lots of money, you have to write a lot, but the fact of the matter is they're an inevitable part of the med school application process.
You'll typically receive an email from these schools saying, hey, so-and-so, your secondary's ready. And you will either click a link online, you will download a file. Through whatever means they send it to you, there will be a list of questions that you have to answer. Now, my recommendation here, as you can probably guess, is get those secondaries in as quickly as you can. Some people will get secondaries, not even think about them, and then 3 weeks later be like, I guess I should probably do these now.
Don't do that. My recommendation is try to turn those essays around as quickly as you can while ensuring that you're sending them high quality writing. For me, during my own application process, I gave myself 48 hours to submit a secondary. Whether that required that instead of watching my TV show that night, I was just writing. Sometimes that's not possible. If you get 5 secondary application essays the same day, you're probably not going to be able to complete them all in that 48-hour time frame. But no matter what, no matter how many you get, my recommendation is to try your best to send those back as quickly as possible. Because much like the first phase, the primary phase of your application where you're sending an AMCAS, the schools are not going to send out interview invites until they receive your secondary answers, your secondary essays, your secondary information, whatever they're asking for. And so just like before, where you don't want other people to take your spots for that first chance of a seat at that med school, you want to get your secondaries in as quickly as possible to make sure that you have as many chances of getting into the school as possible. And so July, August, much of that time is going to be spent writing those secondaries. They're not all going to come out the same day. Some schools will send it out June 29th. Some schools will send it out Nope, they're never going to send it out in April. August 1st. But they're going to send it out throughout the summer. And again, keep in mind that your job in that summer is just getting those essays written, proofread, edited, and returned as quickly as possible. Then the fun part comes in. So as the summer goes on, as you're kind of getting really, really sick of writing, but starting to get pretty excited about interviews, that is when interview prep will start. And I'll definitely make a video about interview prep because although some interviews are fairly easy, there's some really complicated types of interviews that med schools do as well. So you'll be doing some interview prep as the summer wears on. And then honestly, September through about early March, it's going to be interview time. Hopefully you've followed these steps. Hopefully you'll watch the rest of my videos so you kind of know how else to optimize your application. But ideally, you'll be getting interview requests left and right, and you'll be preparing for and actually attending those interviews in summer months, fall months, and early winter months as well. And then you get to hear back. And we'll go more into detail again about all of these pieces, but I just wanted to kind of outline what the general process looks like, from taking the MCAT to asking for letters to writing your med school sort of application list, filling out MCATs, doing the dreaded secondaries. All through this process, if you follow the steps I outlined, you will have your best possible shot of getting into the schools that you really want to go to. And as I tell my students, keep this in mind, there is no harm in being early, but there can be plenty of harm in being late. So please comment, like, subscribe to this video so that you'll be notified when I release new videos about tips and tricks for the application process. If you have any questions at all, my email is linked in the description box below, or you're welcome just to comment on this video and I'll answer as quickly as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.